Our journey began like any other family road trip, filled with excitement and anticipation. We had packed our SUV with everything we thought we'd need: snacks, games, and a carefully planned itinerary. But as we drove deeper into unfamiliar territory, the landscape around us changed. The road narrowed, flanked by towering trees that seemed to close on us. The sun was setting when we realized we were lost. The GPS had stopped working, and the road signs were few and far between. We drove for what felt like hours, the forest growing denser with each passing mile. As panic began, we saw a small, isolated town nestled among the trees. "Maybe someone here can help us," Sarah suggested, her voice tinged with hope. We drove into the town square, which was eerily empty. The buildings were old and worn, their windows dark and unwelcoming. As we stepped out of the car, I noticed a strange silence. There were no sounds of traffic, no people walking around, just the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. An older man appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his gait slow but purposeful. He wore a worn-out hat and a long coat that seemed too heavy for the mild weather. His eyes were sharp, scanning us with curiosity and caution. "Evening," he greeted us, his voice gravelly. "You folks look like you could use some help." "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We seem to have lost our way. Can you tell us how to get back to the highway?" The older man shook his head slowly, a shadow passing over his face. "I'm afraid you won't be able to leave tonight. Best find a place to stay before it gets too dark." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean? We can't leave?" He glanced at the setting sun, then back at us. "This town, it's different. You can't leave once night falls. The forest, it comes alive." The absurdity of his statement made me question his sanity, but there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that made me listen. "What do you mean it comes alive?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Creatures," the man said. "They come out after dark. It's not safe outside." I exchanged uneasy glances with Sarah and the kids. "We need to find a place to stay," I said, my voice firm. We found a small inn at the edge of town, its sign barely legible in the dim light. The innkeeper, a woman named Martha, greeted us with a look of concern. "You shouldn't be here," she said, hushed. "No one leaves once they're here. The town, it keeps you." Over dinner, Martha explained the rules. "Stay inside after dark. Cover all windows. Keep quiet. And whatever you do, don't go into the forest." Her words settled over us like a thick fog. We were trapped in this strange town, surrounded by woods that harbored unknown terrors. As night fell, we could hear strange noises outside, whispers, rustling leaves, and distant growls. It was the beginning of a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Jake, our teenage son, was skeptical. "This is just some creepy small-town legend," he said, trying to sound brave. But even he couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. Emily, our youngest, clung to Sarah, her eyes wide with terror. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hugged her tightly. "We'll be fine, sweetheart. We'll figure this out." As the night deepened, the sounds outside grew louder, more menacing. We huddled in the small room, the sense of dread growing with each passing minute. It was our first night in the strange town, and already it felt like we were fighting for our lives. The morning light brought a temporary sense of relief. The strange noises from the night before were gone, replaced by the usual sounds of a small town waking up. But the tension from our first night lingered in the air. We gathered in the inn's small dining area, where Martha served us breakfast. Her demeanor was kind, but guarded as if she knew something we didn't. "You must be careful," she warned us again. "The nights here are dangerous. Follow the rules and you'll be safe." I nodded, trying to absorb everything she was telling us. "What exactly are we dealing with? What are these creatures?" Martha shook her head. "No one knows for sure. Some say they're spirits, others believe they're something worse. All I know is that they come out at night and hunt." Jake scoffed, his skepticism showing. "This is ridiculous. We can't just stay here forever. There has to be a way out." Martha looked at him with a sad smile. "Many have tried. Some have even made it to the edge of the forest. But they always come back, one way or another." Sarah put a comforting hand on Jake's shoulder. "We need to take this seriously. We don't know what we're dealing with." We spent the day exploring the town and meeting other residents with similar stories. Everyone we spoke to had a different tale of how they ended up here, but all shared the same sense of resignation. It was as if the town had a way of drawing people in and never letting them go. We met Tom, who had been in the town for over a year. "You get used to it," he said with a shrug. "You learn to live with the fear. The key is to follow the rules." He showed us his house, where every window was covered with heavy curtains, and the doors had multiple locks. "You have to make sure they can't see or hear you. That's how you stay safe." As the sun set that evening, we gathered in our room, preparing for another night. We covered the windows with blankets, blocked gaps where light might escape, and ensured the doors were securely locked. The atmosphere was tense, everyone on edge. As darkness fell, the sounds outside began again. This time they were closer, more distinct. We could hear whispers, footsteps, and occasional growls. Emily clung to Sarah, her fear palpable. "Remember the rules," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll be fine as long as we follow the rules." The night seemed to stretch on forever. Every noise made us jump, and every shadow seemed to move. It was a test of nerves, and I could feel the strain it was putting on all of us. At one point, Jake whispered, "What if they get in?" "They won't," I replied firmly. "We won't let them." Morning couldn't come soon enough. When the first light of dawn finally filtered through the blankets, we breathed a sigh of relief. We had made it through another night, but the ordeal was far from over. Over breakfast, we discussed our next steps. "We need to find out more about this town," Sarah said. "There has to be a way out." Tom had mentioned an old library on the outskirts of town that might hold some answers. It was our best lead, and we decided to check it out. The library was a dusty, forgotten place, filled with books that seemed older than the town itself. We split up, each searching for anything that might give us clues about the town's history or how to escape. It was Emily who found the first hint. She tugged on my sleeve, holding up a tattered book. "Daddy, look at this." The book was a collection of former residents' journals detailing their attempts to escape and the horrors they encountered. It was a chilling read, but it also gave us hope. Some journals mentioned a possible way out, a hidden path through the forest that only a few had discovered. We spent the rest of the day poring over the journals, piecing together fragments of information. As evening approached, we returned to the inn armed with new knowledge and a renewed sense of purpose. "We need to be careful," I said as we prepared for another night. "But I think we're starting to understand this place. We have to keep looking for answers." That night, the noises outside were as frightening as ever, but we felt a small glimmer of hope. We had survived another day and were one step closer to finding a way out of this strange, eerie town. The dawn of the third day in the strange town brought a sense of grim determination. We had survived 2 nights and had gathered some information, but we were no closer to finding a way out. Over breakfast, the mood was somber. Everyone seemed lost in their thoughts, grappling with the reality of our situation. Jake, ever the skeptic, broke the silence. "So, what's the plan today? Will we keep reading those dusty old books or do something more productive?" "We need to understand more about this place," I replied. "The journals mentioned a hidden path in the forest. If we can find it, we might have a chance." Martha, the innkeeper, joined us at the table. "I heard you're planning to venture into the forest. It's dangerous. People have gone in and never come back." "We don't have much of a choice," Sarah said. "We can't stay here forever." Martha sighed. "Just be careful, and remember, don't go out after dark." We spent the morning gathering supplies. Tom had given us a map of the town and the surrounding forest, though it was old and faded. We packed food, water, and flashlights, preparing for the worst. As we were getting ready to leave, Emily tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, where's Mr. Whiskers?" Mr. Whiskers was her stuffed rabbit, her constant companion. We searched the room but couldn't find him. Emily started to panic, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's okay, sweetie," Sarah said, trying to comfort her. "We'll find him." We checked the rest of the inn, but there was no sign of the stuffed rabbit. Martha offered to help, but it was as if Mr. Whiskers had vanished into thin air. Emily was inconsolable, and we couldn't delay our search any longer. "I'm sorry, Emily." I hugged her tightly. "We'll keep looking for Mr. Whiskers, but we must go now." We left the inn and headed toward the forest. The air was thick with tension, and every step felt heavy with uncertainty. The path was overgrown, and the trees towered above us, their branches forming a dark canopy. As we ventured further, the light grew dim, and an eerie silence settled over the forest. Jake led the way, map in hand. "According to this, there should be a clearing up ahead." We pressed on, our senses heightened by the strange atmosphere. The forest seemed to close around us, the trees whispering secrets we couldn't understand. Suddenly, we heard a faint sound, distant and haunting laughter. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Jake replied, his grip tightening on the map. "It sounded like a child." We followed the sound, our hearts pounding. The laughter grew louder and more distinct, and then we saw her, a little girl standing in a clearing, her back to us. She wore a white dress, her hair long and tangled. "Emily!" Sarah called out, her voice filled with hope. The girl turned slowly, revealing a face that wasn't Emily's. Her eyes were dark, her expression blank. She held Mr. Whiskers in her hand. "Who are you?" I asked, taking a step forward. The girl didn't answer. She just stared at us, her grip tightening on the stuffed rabbit. Then, without warning, she turned and ran into the forest. "Wait!" Sarah shouted, but the girl was already gone. We chased after her, branches scratching at our skin, the forest growing darker with each step. The laughter echoed around us, disorienting and chilling. Finally, we burst into another clearing, but the girl was nowhere to be seen. "Where did she go?" Jake asked, panting. "I don't know," I replied, frustration and fear mixing in my voice. "But we need to find her. She has Mr. Whiskers." We spread out, searching the clearing and the surrounding trees. The laughter had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Minutes turned into hours, and still there was no sign of the girl or Mr. Whiskers. As the sun set, we knew we had to head back. The thought of being caught in the forest after dark was too terrifying to contemplate. "We need to go," I said, my voice filled with urgency. "We'll come back tomorrow and continue the search." Reluctantly, we returned to the inn, the journey feeling much longer and more treacherous in the fading light. Emily was heartbroken, and the rest of us were filled with a sense of dread. What had started as a search for a missing toy turned into something more sinister. Back at the inn, Martha was waiting for us. "Did you find anything?" "Just more questions," I replied. A little girl appeared with Emily's toy but ran off into the forest. Martha's expression darkened. "There are many lost souls in that forest. Be careful. Not all of them are what they seem." We spent the night huddled together, the noises outside growing more intense. The forest seemed alive with whispers and shadows, the sense of being watched ever present. Emily cried herself to sleep, clutching Sarah tightly. As I lay awake, my mind raced with thoughts of the girl and the missing toy. The town's mysteries deepened, and the forest held secrets that could save or doom us. But one thing was clear: we couldn't give up. We had to find a way to break free from this nightmarish place, no matter the cost. The next morning we woke up determined. The previous day's events had shaken us, but we couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear. Over breakfast, we planned our next move. "We need to be better prepared today," I said, looking around the table. "We'll go back into the forest, but this time we'll take more supplies and be ready for anything." Jake nodded, his jaw set in determination. "I can map out the areas we covered yesterday so we don't waste time retracing our steps." Martha approached our table, a worried expression on her face. "I overheard your plans. If you're going back into the forest, there's something you should know. There's an old house deeper in the woods. It's been abandoned for years, but some say it holds clues about the town's history. It might help you." "Why didn't you mention this before?" Sarah asked, her frustration evident. Martha sighed. "I was hoping you wouldn't have to go that far. It's dangerous, and many who have tried to reach it never returned. But it might be worth the risk if you're determined to find answers." With this new information, we immediately headed deeper into the forest. The path was even more overgrown, and the trees seemed to close around us. The atmosphere was oppressive, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. Emily held my hand tightly, her fear palpable. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a dilapidated old house half hidden by the forest. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, its windows broken and the door hanging off its hinges. "This must be the place," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. We approached cautiously, the sense of unease growing with each step. The door creaked loudly as we pushed it open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floorboards creaked under our weight. "Stay close," I said, echoing in the empty house. We moved through the rooms, searching for anything that might give us a clue. In what appeared to be the living room, we found a series of old journals and maps, much like the ones in the library, but even older and more detailed. Sarah picked up one of the journals, blowing off the dust. "These look like they could be useful." We sat down and began to read, the daylight filtering through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows on the pages. The journals told stories of the town's early days, strange occurrences, and mysterious disappearances. One entry caught my eye. It mentioned a hidden path in the forest, much like the one we were searching for. "This is it," I said, showing the journal to the others. "It talks about a path that leads out of the forest. It matches the descriptions we found in the library." Jake scrutinized the map. According to this, the path starts near a large oak tree with a split trunk. We should be able to find it if we follow the creek. As we continued reading, we heard a noise from upstairs, a soft thump followed by footsteps. We froze, our eyes darting to the ceiling. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her face pale. I nodded, motioning for everyone to stay quiet. We listened intently, the footsteps growing louder, more deliberate. Someone or something was upstairs. Slowly, I made my way to the staircase, my heart pounding. The steps creaked under my weight as I ascended, each sound echoing through the silent house. At the top, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a gaunt, haggard face. It was an older man, his eyes wide with fear. "Please," he whispered, "help me." I approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance. "Who are you? What are you doing?" The older man shook his head, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap out at him. "I got lost. Years ago. I've been hiding here, trying to stay away from them." "From whom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The creatures," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're always watching, always waiting. You have to leave before they come." "We're trying to find a way out," I said. "Do you know anything about the hidden path?" The older man nodded slowly. "I've heard of it, but I've never found it. The forest, it changes. Paths appear and disappear. It's like a maze." We heard a loud crash from downstairs, followed by Emily's scream. I rushed down the stairs, the older man close behind. In the living room, we found Emily standing near a broken window, her face pale with terror. "It was the girl," she said, pointing to the window. "She was watching us." I looked outside, but the girl was gone. The forest was, though. Still, the shadows deepened as the sun set. "We need to get back to the inn," I said, my voice urgent. "It's almost dark." The older man grabbed my arm. "Take me with you. I can't stay here any longer." We quickly gathered the journals and maps, and then returned to the forest. The journey was fraught with tension, every sound putting us on edge. The older man stumbled several times, his frail body barely able to keep up. When we finally reached the inn, Martha was waiting for us, her expression a mix of relief and worry. "You made it back, thank goodness." We ushered the older man inside, locking the doors and covering the windows as quickly as possible. The noises outside started almost immediately, louder and more aggressive than before. "Who is this?" Martha asked, looking at the older man. "He was hiding in the house," I explained. "He's been lost in the forest for years." Martha's eyes widened. "You're lucky to be alive," she told the old man. "Most don't survive that long out there." The older man nodded, his eyes haunted. "I've seen things, terrible things, but I couldn't leave. The forest wouldn't let me." That night, we pored over the journals and maps, trying to piece together the clues. The older man, whose name we learned was Harold, shared little about the town's history and the creatures that haunted it. As the night wore on, the sounds outside grew more intense, the creatures seemingly more determined to get in. We stayed awake and huddled together, our fear a palpable presence in the room. By morning, we were exhausted, but no less determined. We had more pieces of the puzzle, but still many unanswered questions. The forest held the key to our escape, but also untold dangers. We knew we had to be careful, but also knew we couldn't stay in this town forever. The 5th day in the strange town began with a sense of urgency. The journals and maps had given us hope, but also a grim understanding of the dangers we faced. The forest was not just a physical maze, but a place where reality seemed to shift and twist. As we prepared for another expedition, Harold warned us about the whispers. "They start as soon as the sun sets," he said, his voice trembling. "They're soft, almost like the wind, but they're not. They get into your head, making you see things that aren't there." Sarah looked at him, her face pale. "What do we do to stop them?" Harold shook his head. "You can't stop them. You can only try to ignore them. Focus on something real, something grounding." With Harold's advice in mind, we set out again, this time with even more caution. The older man had insisted on coming with us, despite his frailty. "I know these woods," he said. "I can help." We followed the creek as the map suggested, looking for the split oak tree. The day was overcast, and the sky was a dull gray that seemed to press down on us. The forest was eerily quiet, and the usual sounds of wildlife were conspicuously absent. After a few hours, we found the tree. Its trunk was split down the middle just as the map described. It was a landmark, a sign that we were on the right path. "Here it is," Jake said, pointing to the tree. "The hidden path should be nearby." We searched the area, and eventually, Emily found a narrow, almost invisible trail leading deeper into the forest. "Is this it?" she asked, her voice a mix of hope and fear. "I think so," I replied. "Let's go." The path was narrow and overgrown, barely wide enough for us to walk single file. The trees closed around us, their branches forming a dark canopy blocking the light. The air grew colder as we moved more profoundly, and the sense of being watched intensified. As dusk approached, whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustling leaves. But as the light faded, they grew louder and more insistent. It was as if the forest was speaking, trying to lure us off the path. "Ignore them," Harold whispered. "Focus on the path." It was easier said than done. The whispers were like a chorus of different voices, all speaking unison. They spoke of fears, doubts, lost loved ones, and broken promises. They tried to draw us away from the trail, to lead us into the darkness. Emily clung to my hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart," I said, my voice as steady as possible. "Just keep looking at the path. Don't listen to the voices." The further we went, the more distorted reality seemed to become. Shadows moved at the edge of our vision, and shapes flitted through the trees. The path seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways, leading us in circles. When it felt like we were about to lose our way, we stumbled upon another clearing. In the center stood a small, decrepit cabin. It looked ancient, its wooden walls covered in moss and vines. "Is this it?" Jake asked, his voice calm. Harold nodded. "This is the place. It was once a safe house for those who tried to escape." We approached the cabin cautiously, the whispers still echoing around us. Inside, we found more journals, maps, and a cache of supplies. Clearly, others had been here before us, seeking the same answers we were. As we read through the journals, we discovered a common theme. Each entry spoke of a ritual, a way to break the town's curse. The details were vague but involved gathering specific items from different parts of the forest. "This is it," Sarah said, her eyes wide. "This is how we can escape." We spent the rest of the day preparing for the night. The cabin had enough supplies to last us, and we fortified it as best we could. As darkness fell, the whispers grew louder, but we were ready. We knew we had to stay focused to resist the pull of the voices. The night was long and terrifying. The whispers became screams, and the shadows outside the cabin seemed to take on monstrous forms. But we held firm, grounding ourselves in the reality of the cabin and the task ahead. By morning, we were exhausted, but determined. We had a plan, a way to break the curse. It wouldn't be easy, and the forest would fight us every step of the way. But we had hope, and for the first time since arriving in the town, that felt like enough. The following day, the forest seemed different. The air was thick with an electric tension, and the whispers lingered at the edge of hearing, even in the daylight. We knew what lay ahead would be the most challenging part of our journey yet. We gathered the items we had found in the cabin: an old compass, a rusted key, and a tattered map that detailed several landmarks within the forest. Each item was part of the ritual mentioned in the journals. "We need to find these landmarks," I said, spreading the map on the cabin's floor. "Each one holds a piece of the puzzle." Harold pointed to a spot on the map. "This is the first one, the old well. It's not far from here." We set out with a sense of purpose, but the forest seemed to resist our progress. The trees loomed larger, their branches like grasping hands. The path twisted and turned, making it easy to lose our bearings. The air grew colder as we approached the area marked as the old well. The whispers returned, more insistent than ever. They spoke of despair and hopelessness, trying to sap our will. "There it is," Jake said, pointing ahead. The well was ancient, its stones covered in moss and ivy. As we neared it, the whispers intensified, and the ground seemed to shift beneath our feet. "We need to be quick," Sarah said, her voice tense. We searched around the well for anything that matched the journal descriptions. Finally, Emily found a small, intricately carved stone half buried in the dirt. "This must be it," she said, handing it to me. A wave of cold washed over me as soon as I touched the stone. The whispers grew louder, turning into a cacophony of voices. But the stone also brought clarity. It was as if it resonated with something deep within the forest. "Let's move," I said, pocketing the stone. "We have what we need." The journey to the next landmark was even more treacherous. The forest seemed to twist and warp around us, bending reality in ways that defied logic. At times, it felt like we were repeatedly walking through the same patch of trees. The second landmark was an old, crumbling church, its steeple barely visible through the thick canopy. As we approached, the whispers turned into murmurs of prayer and lamentation. We found another piece of the puzzle inside the church, a tarnished silver cross hidden beneath the altar. The moment we touched it, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to move with their own life. "We're getting closer," Sarah said, her breath visible in the frigid air. The third landmark was the hardest to find. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, and the path became more treacherous with each step. The whispers had turned into full-blown hallucinations, making it difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. We finally arrived at a large, ancient oak tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled. The journals had mentioned this tree as the final piece of the ritual. Hidden in its roots, we found a small, ornate box. "Open it," Jake urged, his eyes wide with anticipation. Inside the box was a delicate, intricately designed amulet. The moment I touched it, a surge of energy coursed through me. The forest seemed to shudder, and the whispers grew silent. "This is it," I said, holding the amulet aloft. "We have everything we need." We returned to the cabin, but the forest seemed to resist us less now that we had the items. The whispers were gone, but the sense of being watched remained. Back at the cabin, we prepared for the final part of the ritual. The journals described a series of chants and actions that needed to be performed at the stroke of midnight. As the time approached, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. We gathered in a circle, the items laid out before us. Harold read from the journals, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Focus," he said. "We have to get this right." As midnight struck, we began the ritual. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath us. The items seemed to glow with an inner light, and the amulet pulsed with a strange, rhythmic beat. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the cabin, and we were thrown to the ground. The whispers returned, louder and fiercer than ever. But we held firm, completing the ritual as the journals instructed. When the light faded, the forest was silent. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. We had done it. "We're free," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. But as we stepped outside, we realized the actual cost of our freedom. The forest had changed, its boundaries shifting once more. The path home was still unclear, and the faint whispers remained. "We're not done yet," I said, determination in my voice. "We still have to find our way out of here." With the ritual complete, we expected the forest to release its hold on us. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that our journey was far from over. The forest had changed, but was still a labyrinth of twisted paths and shifting boundaries. We spent our days searching for a way out, and our nights huddled in the cabin, listening to the faint whispers that never completely disappeared. The journals had given us hope, but also revealed a darker truth. The town and the forest were connected by something ancient and evil. One morning, Harold approached me as we were preparing to set out again. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his voice grave. He led me to a hidden compartment on the cabin floor, revealing a set of old, dusty recordings. "The town's original residents made these," he explained. "They tried to document what was happening here." We spent the next few days listening to the recordings. They were filled with desperate voices, recounting their attempts to escape and the horrors they had witnessed. One particular recording stood out. It spoke of a hidden bunker deep within the forest that might hold the key to escaping. "We have to find this bunker," I said, my resolve strengthened. "It might be our only chance." Using the maps and the information from the recordings, we set out once more. The journey was arduous, the forest seeming to fight us every step of the way. But we pressed on, driven by the hope that the bunker held the answers we needed. After several days, we finally found it. The bunker was hidden beneath a mound of earth, its entrance almost entirely obscured by overgrown vegetation. We cleared the entrance and descended into the darkness. Inside, we found a series of rooms filled with old equipment and more recordings. The air was musty, and the walls were covered in mold, but it was clear that others had used this place before us. We uncovered more details about the town's history as we explored the bunker. It had been founded by a group of settlers who had stumbled upon the forest and decided to stay. But they quickly realized that the forest was not what it seemed. Strange occurrences and disappearances plagued them, and they eventually resorted to desperate measures to try and escape. One of the recordings described a final ritual, a way to break the town's curse once and for all. But it was incomplete, and the details were lost to time. "We need to find the rest of the information," Sarah said, her determination unwavering. "This is our only chance." We spent the next few days scouring the bunker, piecing together fragments of information from the recordings and journals. It was slow, painstaking work, but we gradually began understanding what needed to be done. The final ritual required a sacrifice, a life given willingly to appease the dark forces that held the town and forest in their grip. It was a grim realization, but we knew it was our only hope. As we prepared for the ritual, the weight of what we would do hung heavily over us. We gathered the necessary items and went to the clearing where the ritual would be performed. Harold volunteered to be the sacrifice. "I've lived here long enough," he said, his voice steady. "It's time for me to go. This is my way of making things right." We tried to convince him otherwise, but he was resolute. "This is my choice," he said. "Let me do this." With heavy hearts, we began the ritual. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath us. As we chanted the incantations, Harold stepped into the center of the clearing, a look of peace on his face. A blinding light filled the clearing when the ritual was complete, and we were thrown to the ground. When we got up, Harold was gone, his sacrifice complete. The forest was silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We had done it. "We're free," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. Returning to the cabin, we realized that the forest had changed again. The paths were more precise, and the boundaries seemed to have shifted. The whispers were gone, replaced by a sense of calm. We knew we still had a long journey ahead of us, but we felt a sense of hope for the first time since arriving in the town. We had broken the curse, and now it was up to us to find our way home. The relief we felt after completing the ritual was short-lived. Though seemingly more benign, the forest still held its mysteries and dangers. We had broken the curse, but our journey was far from over. We needed to find a way out. The forest was vast and unyielding. We gathered our supplies and set out again, this time with purpose and hope. The paths were more apparent now, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, but we knew better than to let our guard down. As we walked, we talked about our plans for when we finally escaped. "I just want to go home," Emily said, her voice filled with longing. "I miss my friends, and I miss Mr. Whiskers." "We'll get there," I promised, squeezing her hand. "We just need to stay focused." The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, and the days blurred together. We followed the map and the clues we had gathered, but it often felt like we were going in circles. The sense of being watched never entirely disappeared, though the whispers were gone. While we were setting up camp one evening, we suddenly heard some noises coming from the bushes. We were on high alert, our senses frozen in anticipation. A group of people came out of the shadows, indicating that there were other survivors stuck in the town. They were wary at first, but they relaxed once we explained who we were and what we had done. "We've been searching for a way out too," one of them, a woman named Karen, said. "We've heard of the ritual, but never knew how to complete it." "We've broken the curse," I said, "but we still need to find the way out." Karen nodded. "We might be able to help. We've mapped out a large part of the forest. Maybe we can combine our maps and find the way together." We spent the next few days working with the other survivors, pooling our knowledge and resources. The combined maps gave us a clearer picture of the forest and its hidden paths. One night, as we were discussing our next move, we heard a familiar sound. The whispers had returned, but this time they were different, more aggressive. The forest was fighting back, unwilling to let us go so quickly. "We need to move," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't stay here." We packed up quickly and set out in the darkness, the whispers growing louder with each step. The forest seemed to close around us, the paths shifting and changing before our eyes. We encountered more survivors as we walked, each with stories of loss and despair. Some had been in the town for years, others only a few weeks. They all shared the same goal, to escape the forest and find their way home. The journey was grueling. the forest throwing every obstacle in our path. But we pressed on, driven by the hope of freedom and the memories of those we had lost. One day, as we neared what we hoped was the edge of the forest, we heard a strange noise, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down our spines. The creatures Harold had warned us about were still out there, hunting us. "We have to be careful," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stay close and stay quiet." We moved cautiously, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig setting our nerves on edge. The growls grew louder, and we knew we were being hunted. The ground beneath us suddenly gave way, and we tumbled into a hidden pit. The fall was jarring, and we struggled to regain our footing. The pit was bottomless, the walls slick with moss and dirt. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, panic in his voice. We worked together, using what little strength we had left to climb out of the pit. As we emerged, we saw creatures unlike anything we had ever seen. They were tall and thin, their skin a mottled gray, their eyes glowing with an evil light. They advanced slowly, their movements deliberate and predatory. We backed away, our hearts pounding in our chests. "We can't outrun them," Sarah said, trembling. "We have to fight." We grabbed whatever we could find, branches, rocks, anything that could be used as a weapon. The creatures lunged at us, their claws sharp and deadly. The battle was fierce, and we fought with everything we had. The other survivors joined in, their determination matching our own. We managed to fend off the creatures, but not without injury. Sarah had a deep gash on her arm, and Jake's leg was severely bruised. "We need to keep moving," I said, helping Sarah. "We're close. I can feel it." We pressed on, the creatures still following us but at a distance. The forest began to thin, and we saw a glimmer of light in the distance. It was the edge of the forest, the boundary we had been searching for. We ran towards the light with renewed energy, the whispers and growls fading behind us. As we crossed the boundary, a wave of relief washed over us. We had made it. We stumbled out of the forest, our bodies battered and bruised, but our spirits unbroken. We were free. "We did it," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "We're out." We looked back at the forest. Its dark, twisted trees were now a distant memory. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the landscape. We had survived the nightmare and had come out stronger on the other side. As we made our way home, we knew that the forest and the town would always be a part of us. The memories of those we had lost, the battles we had fought, and the hope that had kept us going would stay with us forever. But we were free,